John Frost looked on the gathered crowd, now 3,000 strong. With heavy heart, his voice rang loud as he sang this loveless song. God is a guide from field, from wave, from plough, from anvil, and from loom. We come our country's rights to save and speak a tyrant faction's doom. We raise the watchword liberty. We will be free. For when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament comes crashing down with Robert's Rules of Order. And bobbies took an oath to be our nation's warders, swearing that they would enforce Sir Robert's Rules of Order. To Newport rose a million friends who rallied each supporter to join this flood of working men against Robert's Rules of Order. For when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament comes crashing down with Robert's Rules of Order. Went like this, on the steps of Parliament, John Frost stood proud and tall. A hush fell on this great event, as he told them one and all. Depose the gentry and the crown, depose the House of Lords, or join the Queen in exile by Robert's Rules of Order. So Chartists, Luddites, Communists, recall each faithful martyr who died so you could have your new world Robert's Rules of Order. Say it loud, vote your favor, shout it high. All in favor, you say aye. Favor, aye, favor. Aye. A mandate of the people's cry. Favor, aye, favor. Aye. Let's hear the opposition side. Like a stubborn donkey's bray. All opposed, you say nay. Opposed, opposed. The motion carries anyway. As currents change and bring to us our tear-corrupted warder, in chains subdued and ill-abused, he's left with no supporters. Mobility's will can then proceed by our own rules of order, and we'll all cheer for country's sake when Robert's drawn and quartered. Well, when the rising tide is turned in every London quarter, Parliament shall be reborn with Robert's Rules of Order!
Okay. All right. Now, see, I moved. And you're, yeah, I was going to say, okay, now we're better. And I think my lenses are a little foggy too. It seems to be a little blurry because it's my iPhone and, you know, get touchy, get touchy with it. All right. So it's kind of more of a loose flowing discussion. I don't know how prepared you did, or you were just like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. Whoops. And I still haven't gotten the sleep. I was hard asleep on my pillow just a little while ago. There's several interesting things. I'm sorry?
You got bedhead?
Yeah, I do. I got the bed crease. I was only slept for like 20 minutes. If anyone, though, has any questions, please stick it in chat. And like I told you before we started, this is also going out on Pink Floyd. What did I do?
If you have any questions, here's where you can stick it.
Yeah, you can stick it up your chat. Just stick it right on up there. What was that? So
what do you mean?
I heard a weird echo. Never mind. This is going out on Pink Flame of Liberty as well because I haven't really put out much content this week. It's been a crazy holiday week. There'll be more. I did some Matt. I was going to do some more Matt today, which is why I had the plaid on, but I had it queued up and I just don't think I'm going to have time to do it. So what we're talking about today is suspending the rules, which we all just love from convention. I have like a hotkey for, you know, delegate so-and-so, move to suspend the rules. Okay. But I think it's super, super misunderstood. Yes. And and you jump in whenever, because otherwise I'll just yapper on. It is, if I remember, it's on that test quiz as the exception, and we had this on the calendar too, on the calendar quizzes we were taking, is what is the exception to the general rule that only one question can be pending at any time? And some people will go, no, there's multiple questions pending at a time. Say you have a motion with an amendment and then an amendment to the amendment. There's still only one question pending at a time. So if you're on the amendment to the amendment, you're limited to the amendment to the amendment. You dispose of that, then you move on to the amendment. Dispose of that, then you move on to the main question. Suspend the rules has an exception to that. And do you want to talk about what the exception to that is, or do you want, or do you know where I'm going?
What it is, and I'm going to be digging through Robert's to try to see if I can find it.
Okay, now I'll say it then, because there's two versions of suspend the rules. You can suspend the rules so that you could take up debate of a thing, or you could suspend the rules and do the thing. So those are two pending questions. In the second case, it's two pending questions at the same time. You can suspend the rules and adopt a bylaws resolution that no one named Mike Seebeck can be a member of the Libertarian Party. So you're voting on two things, and it's the same vote threshold, 2/3. If the vote is yes, you have suspended the rules and adopted the bylaws amendment with one vote. So it's two questions.
There's actually three things there, because if they did that, they'd owe me $1,500.
Well, we just throw you out. Just get a bunch of us and throw you out. So that is the one exception, is when you suspend the rules and do a thing. The more typical form of suspend the rules is suspend the rules so that you could go on to some other thing.
Right.
Now, personally, and I think you agree with me, I think that second form should be illegal. And I do too. I feel like researching some other parliamentary authorities like the AIPSC. Forget the Democratic Rules of Order. They just suck. You could do whatever you want. But I really would like to look at the AIPSC to see if that's allowed. Because go ahead.
Yeah, the problem with the second form of that is that it actually encompasses more than just suspending the rules and adopting a measure, because it has the effect of not only suspending the rules, taking up the measure, closing debate on the measure if it's debatable, and then moving to adopt it all in one fell swoop. So you're actually dealing with four things at once on there. And that's just insane.
But it's still only two pending motions, because contained within suspend the rules is that it's an undebatable motion. But it's screwed up.
Very
and
screwed.
If you are suspending the rules to do a thing, and the thing that you want to do would normally be debatable, you are correct. It has shut off debate, such as a bylaws amendment, which is what it's used for a lot of the times. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be trouble. I know I know how inconvenient it is to have to actually debate something and hear opinions that might not agree with your own, that might be minority opinions. I know how inconvenient that is to some people. But you do usually... Yes, we won't mention any. But you will usually get to a better result. And sometimes it will keep you from adopting something very, very foolhardy. Very, very bad. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in 2010 in Oregon when they amended their bylaws that immediately made their convention invalid because it screwed with their quorum requirements. But I bet you it was done through a suspend the rules and adopt X bylaws amendment so that no one had time to debate or think about it.
It probably was. The question, though, becomes, was it self-inflicted on purpose or not?
No, I don't think anyone thinks it was. I don't believe it was. Everything I know about the situation, it was oopsie. It was an oopsie.
Well, based on understanding as they were going on up there at the time, who the hell knows? But
yeah.
It was.
But I bet you because otherwise it'd be really embarrassing if you guys baited that. Sorry, I don't think even any of the guilty are still in the party, but I bet you. But that's the sort of, we're just going to pretend that's what happened, because that would be a real good explanation and a really good explanation as to why it's usually a very, very bad idea to suspend the rules and to do something. And, you know, if I were
I'll throw one at you. Okay. If it was a 2/3 on suspend the rules to turn around and adopt a bylaws change, which in the case of the party would unlock the double 7/8 padlock, would that still be 2/3, or would that require 7/8?
It would require that, right. So if the thing you want to do requires more than 2/3, in order to combine the two into one motion, it has to be at the higher threshold. Because there are still state parties that have a constitution and bylaws in which the Constitution is at a 3/4 amendment threshold. So if they were to suspend the rules to amend their Constitution to do X, it would have to be the 3/4 threshold. It'll be the higher threshold.
And that makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, it creates a large yellow light that people could run and cause all sorts of havoc.
Yeah. So now, here's the trick question. God, and I hate this question, and this is something that actually in AIPSC also isn't allowed. And once, sometime down the road, even though it's kind of weird to call ourselves a cult of RONR, I'd like us to start going through some AIPSC stuff to start to learn it. I'm becoming a bit of a fan. There's some drawbacks on some of the things, but other things I think have a bit more clarity. So, for instance, this is a trick question. I'm going to see what people, and I do see your question, Midwest, but we don't talk politics on this show. We do a little bit on jokes, but this isn't a political commentary show. It's Robert's Rules. So if you want to talk about Robert's Rules, we'll do that, but we're not talking about annexing Canada and stuff like that. Unless we want to talk about what motion would be required to do that. I know because it's on Pink Flame of Liberty, which is mostly political, but whatever. We make snarky comments about politics, though, mostly LP politics, and we've always done that. So that's nothing new. Here's the trick question for anyone who is in the audience and might be curious. Can you ever, not the entire group, but can you ever suspend a bylaw?
Abso-frickin-lutely not. And that is straight out of Roberts.
Unless...
But I know what you're going to say, that it is possible.
Oh, how is it possible?
Because it is possible to have a majority of the membership do a suspension of the bylaw because they will interpret it per rules of interpretation, and then turn around and reestablish it after the fact.
No, I was actually going to go someplace else. I was going to go somewhere else with that. If I'm doing the ums again, I need to go to Toastmasters or do something else. If you were here, I could say kick me every time I say You can suspend a bylaw if, now I'm not saying amend it, like I'm not saying delete it and then put it back in, which is kind of like what you were talking about, which of course you can do. That's not suspending it though. That's deleting it and then putting it back in.
It's going around the block to the right to make a left turn. I mean,
yeah, but you can suspend a bylaw if the bylaw is in the nature of a rule of order.
Yeah, that's true.
And
if it allows for its own suspension,
or silent about its own suspension.
I'm not so sure about that part of it.
I'm 100% sure. So,
okay.
What the hell? So, yeah, you can also suspend a bylaw that's not in the nature of a rule of order if it provides for its own suspension. But just say it's a bylaw in the nature of a rule of order, and it doesn't say it's not suspendable, then it is suspendable.
That's not what 25.7 appears to say.
Now we'll go look it up, and it's more in the beginning where 1 second here. Suspension of the rules.
Page 248.
If we go back to the very beginning of the story, 2.8.
What?
We'll go to your citation too to make sure there's no contradiction. But I know where I'm getting this from is from the very beginning. Yeah, so 2.8.4, Constitution and bylaws includes all rules that the society considers so important that they cannot be changed without previous notice to the members and the vote of a specified large majority, such as 2/3, and B, cannot be suspended, with the exception of clauses that provide for their own suspension under specified conditions, or clauses in the nature of rules of order. So any bylaw can be suspended if it provides for its own suspension, or any clauses that are in the nature of a rule of order. And I am inferring from that, as long as it doesn't specifically say this cannot be suspended. Because the default... I'm sorry?
Here's what 25.7 says. But here's what 25.7 says. Rules that cannot be suspended. Rules contained in the bylaws or constitution cannot be suspended no matter how large the vote in favor of doing so or how inconvenient the rule in question may be, unless the particular rule specifically provides for its own suspension, or unless the rule is in the nature of order 214.
Yeah, that's the same thing 2.8 says. So if it's properly in the nature of a rule of order, it can be suspended, even if it's in the bylaws. That's why you shouldn't. That's why you shouldn't put rules of order in the bylaws, because it confuses people.
And if you do, you make sure you explicitly indicate that they're a rule.
Well, then you usually just put them in convention rules or some other kinds of rules.
Yeah, because 214 describes what rules of order are in relation to orderly transaction of business and the meetings and the duties of officers in that connection. Oh, interesting. Duties of officers.
Yeah, that's why we were able... Okay, so let's go back. We're going to do an LP example.
Yeah.
It was ill-advised. I was not in favor of it, so I have no problem saying this. But there was a motion to vacate the chair at the very beginning of the convention, before anyone knew Whitney was sick, because I would hope nobody would want to do that to a sick person, but they were trying to have her not be the convention chair and have Ken Molman be and it ended up that way anyway.
They didn't know she was sick at the time.
Yeah.
Nobody did, really.
But somebody raised a point of order that such a thing was not possible, because the bylaws say that the chair of the party shall be the chair of all conventions. Well, that bylaw is in the nature of a rule of order, so it is suspendable by a 2/3 vote.
Mm-hmm.
That is also why they also tried to do that with me during the 2020 convention, when I was questioning the legitimacy of the electronic convention and whether or not I would sign the certificates of nomination. If you remember, I can't remember who made the motion, but someone else made the motion to have someone else be convention secretary who didn't have a moral compunction about signing the certificates of nomination. And that was perfectly allowable, because the bylaw that says that the secretary will be a convention secretary is in the nature of a rule of order.
Which raises the reverse question, though. Okay. If a duty of an officer can be suspended as a rule of order, does that require a suspension to change that duty?
Yeah, for that specific duty, it does.
Thank you.
Yeah, because there has to be some kind of vote that does that. Unless,
I'm grinning.
I know. But let's go back to the Whitney example.
You know where I'm going, but I'm not going to talk
Yeah,
about
and that
it.
isn't really what I was intending. This was just kind of a free flowing discussion. Duties can yeah. Let's get away from that topic because that isn't really where we're intending to go. But that's why that point of order against Whitney wasn't the point of order was not well taken because it was properly in the nature of a rule of order. So when you say, I actually said something then a little hasty that you should never have rules of order in your bylaws. Things like that are typically in your bylaws. I mean, some of the more weirder things. There has been a claim, but here's why I think AIPSC is, I'm going to have to see what they do about things like vacating the chair or something like that. But in general, anything that's in the bylaws is not suspendable, even if it's in the nature of a rule of order. I'm not an expert on AIPSC. I just know I've attended multiple classes where it says that's a huge difference between Roberts and the standard code. And I kind of think the standard code's more consistent there because if you ask 10 parliamentarians, forget about things like who chairs a convention, on some more obscure things, is, you know, that meme with the guy pointing at the butterfly, you know, is this fascism? You could have, is this a rule of order? That is so unclear because it's been claimed by some people that the 7/8 rule for the statement of principles is a rule of order and not a bylaw. And I can make an argument both ways. It's a distinction without a difference because you still need the 7/8, but that almost makes anything a rule of order.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, is a vote threshold considered a rule of order?
That's the argument, is that anything that specifies anything other than a majority vote that's not in your parliamentary authority is a rule of order.
Ooh, that opens up a whole can of worms.
But it doesn't say that. So that's why I really do not like that idea of that you can suspend things in the bylaws that are properly in the nature of the rule of order, because I don't think the phrase properly in the nature of a rule of order is as nearly well defined, because it's not. Some things are really clear, like who's the convention chair, or if you are foolish enough to put your agenda in your bylaws, that's orderly transaction of business. That is definitely in the nature of a rule of order. But when you start getting into obscure things like such and such requires a certain vote threshold, and a rule book like Roberts isn't going to deal with something like the statement of principles. I personally don't think that's in the nature of a rule of order. I don't think that's in the nature of a rule of order. But I know many parliamentarians that disagree with me on that.
I wouldn't call it a rule of order just because it's not. It doesn't directly relate to the procedures of the
orderly transaction of business.
Yeah, I mean it's an applied principle to it, but it's not direct.
Yeah. So, Charles says consensus is much preferable to majority rule. In a voluntary society, when I say society, I don't mean society as in the world at large. I mean as an assembly. In a voluntary assembly, I actually don't agree with you. There's a great article. We went over a bit of it last episode in that compared consensus versus Robert's requirement for a majority. Mike and I were involved in the nightmare of a committee that allegedly we weren't on it, but we were observing it. If Colorado a few years ago, it's not the best way to get to the best result. And because then there isn't.
In a consensus, everybody can be wrong.
and you don't have minority reports. And sometimes the
Yep.
minority reports end up being very valuable. Anyway, speaking with you about Colorado bylaws, you and I need to talk about that, because I'm going to be, well, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, that's a whole different. It's a whole different long discussion.
Alrighty, so let's go back to the basics. It says, so why even would you ever suspend the rules? You adopted rules. Why would you ever want to suspend them? And what are the... Yeah, and what are the rules? The rules are Roberts, what's in Roberts, unless it says it can't be suspended, which is only very few things. These are rules of order. Rules of order can be in your standing rules.
Or your special rules.
Yeah. It's convention rules are called standing rules, I think, even though they contain special rules of order and standing rules, which are different things and have different vote thresholds. But
in the whole area, they got to clean it up in Roberts.
Yeah. Yeah, you can adopt, though, special rules of order, which, like in the LP, are in the policy manual, though there are standing rules in there, too. So a special rule of order, an SRO, you can adopt. But it says you would want to suspend that rule when it's desired that the assembly take up a question or do something that would be in violation of a rule that applies. It can be proposed in some cases to suspend the rules to permit accomplishment of the desired purpose. So, for instance, say we'll use the LP as an example. I don't even know if the agenda actually says this. I think it did at one time in our special rules of order in the policy manual, that the last meeting of the year would be the budget meeting, which it normally is. But there's been a few years where the budget was adopted in January rather than in December. That's a rule that can be suspended.
Yeah.
So that's an example. I'm trying to think of something else from the policy manual that could be suspended. Interesting. Could the LNC suspend free substitution of alternates?
Ooh.
It's in the policy manual.
In the policy manuals, not in the bylaws.
It just says there will be alternates.
That does pertain to the orderly conducting of business. I almost think they could do that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of some other weird things.
Well, hang on a second. Let me float something on that. Would if suspending that interfere with the rights of the regional reps and the alternates to do that substitution? Or am I barking up a wrong tree?
No, I think you're barking up a good tree, because I think that's kind of inherent in the very definition, or
how they represent their regions.
Yeah, it's that it's kind of inherent in the definition of an alternate, isn't it?
I would think.
I guess if someone wanted to get what we mean by free substitution, though, I think can be suspended. What we mean by free substitution is they're both there. They're both physically present. It's kind of I'm just going to pass the baton, and we've seen this abused. And I have to say,
I've seen it where the primary had to say, alternates voting because I got to go to the restroom, or something.
Yeah, but that's a proper use. That's a proper use. We've seen, though, and listen, I participated in this in a committee before, too, so I'm not entirely innocent here, but looking back, that was an abuse of the process, but perfectly allowed.
Not to mention Louisville.
To do switching back and forth. Yeah. But that was allowed in Louisville.
It was just dirty pool.
It was dirt. It was a dirty trick. But I'm talking about when you got two people sitting next to each other, they're both there, and the one person says, I'm going to let my alternate debate on this. But then the primary takes power back to do the vote. I would think it should somewhat be like when the chair yields to the vice chair, it needs to be for the entire question.
Yes, I was about ready to say that, but you said it better than I could.
But
'Cause
that's not
that
what
would solve it easily.
it would. So I think we could suspend the rules to say that if both people are in the room, that a primary, if they yield to their delegate, there isn't free substitution. It's for the entire question.
And that's actually the better way to do it anyway. Just because, well, let's use the legit case. The primary yields to the alternate to go out and use the restroom. They come back in, debate's still ongoing. How is the primary going to know what in the hell's going on? It's better to sit and wait and let the alternate deal with it until the question's decided, and then get back in.
Yes.
It's just good governance, for lack of and good common sense.
We're gonna put up something here, even though we're not talking. This is the only sidetrack we're gonna do about consensus, because we do have a topic for this particular show. But Charles Stewart said disruptions, because in arguing for consensus, disruptions frequently are brought in by delegates who use rules of order for creating gridlock, and whom I think there's a misspelling. They're not good faith participants in the community. We've seen that happen a million times. The solution to that is a good chair that keeps things moving. Gridlock cannot. I'm sorry?
He also knows how to handle it.
Yeah. And this has happened throughout the years. We might be thinking of a specific convention right now, but it's happened multiple times, that the solution to that is a chair who can control the room. It is not possible for delegates to create gridlock without, I'm not going to say the consent of the chair, but without some fault on the part of the chair. The buck stops with the chair. The chair needs to see that going on and put an end to it. That does not, in my opinion, favor consensus, because what happens with consensus is shyer people who then think, oh my God, I'm the one holding up everything. And they might have an excellent point, get bullied into silence because they don't want to be the one to break consensus. Consensus is a way, right, of intimidating people into going along to get along, when it's understood by everyone that everyone has a vote, and that one lone no is something they have a right to and they can't be bullied out of. I think that is far, far better than consensus. And I'll give an example of Mark Montoni in this. And he used to be on I think he said it was a zoning board, and there were 17 people on it. And he said nearly every vote was 16-1. And he said that one vote meant he was doing his job.
Mm-hmm.
But
I've seen cases where there was an attempt to, this happened in a California convention many years ago, where there was an attempt to get a consensus on a specific vote. And somebody in debate raised a point that nobody had thought of, and it was a legitimate point. I don't know what the topic was, I don't remember, but it flipped the entire argument, and instead of getting a consensus to pass the measure, it failed.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden people are like, oh, we never considered that. They're right. Boom. Never mind. So
I think I think the consensus model disempowers the extreme minority from having a voice.
It also discourages debate.
And while some people, again, the guilty shall remain nameless, might not like hearing the voice of the extreme minority, there is value in that. It might take a little longer, but I'm trying not to use like super leftist terminology here where people get into riots, but I do think there is some truth to it that sometimes in societies, real societies, not like assemblies, that riots can be the voice of the unheard, but dissension within an assembly or a parliamentary society, growing undercurrents and cracks in the cohesiveness of the assembly, is when the minority feels unheard. Because as long as they feel heard, most of the time, they may grumble a bit and go, well, I still don't agree. They're going to go along with it unless it's something like really, really abhorrent, because at least they were heard and got their no vote on the record.
They were respected instead of ignored and stampeded.
Right. And said, well, everyone else, we're going to just go with consensus. I think the majority, obviously, as libertarians, we're individualists. We're there's certainly the tyranny of the majority as well. But when you're dealing with voluntary societies, you don't have to be a member. And when you split off into certain groups and you decide, you voluntarily agree that it's going to be a majority or 2/3 or whatever that carries, that's something that you have agreed to as long as you can walk away from it. Now, some people will say that we've done that in this country, but no, we haven't. I didn't sign shit.
I did.
So, alrighty. What type of motion is a suspend the rules?
Oh God. It's not an instant. It's not. It is an incidental main motion. What am I thinking? Yeah, incidental motion, actually, not a main motion, but incidental. Because you can do that when another main motion is pending. So
it can be an incidental main motion, though, can't it?
Can be, but it doesn't have to be. Because you can do it when no pending, which would make it an incidental main motion, or you can do it while business is pending, which would make it just an incidental motion.
Okay.
You can't have two main motions. Right.
Yep. Well, yeah, you can. You can have two main motions pending at the same time.
Yeah, shouldn't.
Suspend the rules and do the thing is the exception that you can't have two main motions pending at the same time.
It's really one two combined into one, but
it is two main, right? That's the exception, that you can't have two main motions pending at the same time. Okay.
I mean, fixing Roberts.
Yeah, I don't like that. I think
I drive Dan Hahnemann nuts over on the forum because I find things in Roberts that are whacked out.
Yeah, I don't like that. And you want to know what? In all these other like meetings that I observe of some other groups, I don't know if I've ever seen suspend the rules and do the thing ever used. It's only in the LP that I see it used. It's allowed, but that I don't really see this elsewhere.
I tend to try to discourage it when I'm parliamentarian at certain things.
Well, it's kind of like debating and calling the question. You can do it, but you're gonna be the asshole.
Exactly. It's just it's legal but not desirable.
Yes. But this is the one I wanted to go over. So,
okay.
What's the vote threshold to suspend the rules?
2/3 usually. Pardon me.
See, you're sounding like me. I've been hacking up my lungs.
I've been fighting something off for the last month or two, and it just gets residual crud that just keeps hanging around. It's driving me nuts.
Tell me about it. Since COVID, I've been sick with something or other.
This has been more like.
But hey, you'll like this. You remember? I think I showed you the big asshole in my arm. Look how good it's healed.
That's good.
2 weeks ago, that was like pretty gruesome. It looked like a zombie took a bite out of me, but that's healed up really, really well. Usually 2/3. Okay,
right. But it may there are exceptions to that.
That's what I want to talk about. What are the other vote thresholds?
Oh.
See, I told you this we were going to talk about. I thought you'd be prepared.
No, I know how to. I know what you're going to say. Trying to say.
There's two of them. There's two. You're going for the harder one. Forget about the harder one. There's.
The one I'm thinking of is. I know there's two, but the one I'm thinking of here is where you cannot have. It has to do with the suspension of a rule, which would impact, and I'm going to say this wrong, but you know where I'm going with it. It would have to be a threshold larger than the impact to the minority.
Right. Let's do that 1 second, though. What
I know
is?
I'm butchering wording there, but
Yeah. We'll do. Actually, Robert's words that one really well. We'll read that exact wording. I have it right here. But what's the other threshold that people forget? That you can suspend the rules with a 2/3 vote, or, and this is always,
majority of the membership.
Of the entire membership.
Yes. Yes.
So, in a convention, that would be all registered delegates, whether they're in on the floor or not. Not of delegates present, of the entire membership. So the membership of a convention is all of the delegates. And if it's a board, it would be all of the board members, whether they're all present or not. And that leads to something that we talked about before in this show called the suspension paradox. Because normally a majority of the entire membership will be a harder vote threshold than a 2/3 vote, because a lot of times there's people abstaining, they're not in the room. But in a small body, sometimes those two numbers converge and flip.
Yep.
Where it's easier to get a majority of the entire membership than it is to get a 2/3 vote. We did a show.
We did talk about.
Or the numbers are like only 1 or 2 off. Rather, the larger the body, it gets, it's
the more
different.
Divergent it gets.
Yes, the more divergent it gets.
Yeah, we did talk about it. And the wording I was looking for was that, and here it is under characteristic 7. No rule protecting a minority of a particular size, including 1, can be suspended in the face of negative vote as large as the minority protected by the rule.
Yes, and that had come up recently too, and it's something we don't discuss. But let's discuss it like in the context of the 7As. If that is in fact in the nature of a rule of order, it couldn't be suspended by you would have to have
a minority protected here. It would be the 1/8.
Would be the 1/8, right?
Right.
So if there's more than a 1/8 negative vote, then you can't suspend it,
regardless of a 2/3. Yeah. So there you go. So there's the simple example.
Yes. And it's if we go on to the next page, some rules cannot be suspended. And we're going to go there. Rules, we already talked about that are in the bylaws unless they're properly in the nature of the rule of order or provide for their own suspension. Same thing with
actual laws.
But notice something here. I didn't notice this before. Richard Brown brought this up to me. This didn't used to be in Roberts. This is a change. You are allowed to have, for instance, the Society of Bank Robbers, in which your bylaws deal with how to rob a bank, which is all obviously very illegal. And normally laws supersede bylaws, so it would seem like your society itself would be null and void. But if you read that again, though, there's an adjective that's been added to 25.8. It says, no applicable procedural rule.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have a society that has bylaws that that dictate you to do illegal things. You're not violating a procedural rule.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that. I mean, I'm not a law person as it is, but like we have to live in the world that we're in. Then, because I could tell you within the legal field as a paralegal, like we're arguing what is actually a rule of order. There are some that are clear. There are some that are fuzzy. What's a procedural rule, procedural law versus a substantive law? That's also a huge debate because there's a huge gray area there too. There are some that are clear, and then there are some that are not.
For the lay people here, what is considered a substantive law?
oh God, you have to come up with well, you can't murder somebody. Murder.
Okay.
And procedural one would be like the flag code.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just
Can it
pulling stuff out. Yeah, just pulling stuff out my booty, but like those are the sorts of things, you know.
Okay.
But there's a lot that is a gray area. Is you have to drive on the right, you know, what side of the road we drive on here as opposed to England. Is that procedural law? Is that substantive? Well, it's governing the procedure of how you drive, but it's also dealing with safety. And if all of a sudden you go on the other side of the road,
anyway.
You know, there's huge debate. And that's probably one that lawyers could clear up really quickly. But I'm just saying there's gray areas even in the law. But it says no applicable procedural rule prescribed by federal, state, or local law can be suspended unless that rule specifically provides for its own suspension. What is it? You know, that's unclear. Does it mean within the law it provides for its own suspension, or does it say you can't suspend it unless within your own bylaws you say we don't care that it can't be suspended?
Okay, it says no applicable procedural rule that's prescribed by federal, state, or local law. Okay, let's use a Colorado example here. Maybe this might help clear it up. We have the minor party law out there. Okay. The minor party law has some specific details about what has to go into the state Colorado bylaws by definition. Okay.
Don't tell the board.
It's right there if they'd frickin' read their own bylaws. I made sure of that years ago. But
bylaws? We don't need bylaws.
They need to check their appendix. But anyway, but those are prescribed by the state law that have to be in there. So you could argue that those rules, if they're rules, can't be suspended.
Unless
it allow the rule in the bylaws would provide for its own suspension.
Is it saying the rule in the bylaws or the rule in the law? I think it's unclear what rule it's referring to there.
I think the way it's worded, because talk about procedural rules versus the laws, I think they're applying it to the rules in the bylaws. Because how the hell are you going to? Have you ever seen a law in, you know, federal, state, or local or whatever that can be suspended?
Well, I know ones that I have actually, but they don't call it suspension, but it's in the major party law in Colorado. That says about major parties and primaries that they can put in their bylaws that they're opting out. And that is a kind of, we do that. We don't have to, though. We did that in the abundance of caution in case the law changed and somebody missed putting that in the bylaws. But the major parties can opt out here. It requires a really high vote threshold per state law to put it in their bylaws, but they can put it in their bylaws. And to me, that's a kind of suspension of the state law that the major parties will participate in primaries.
It could be seen that way.
Yeah, but I think it's like a three-fourths vote, and it can be in their bylaws.
Yeah, that's a large one. So.
Rules which embody a fundamental principles of parliamentary law, which, by the way, are not listed anywhere. There are some things that everyone agrees are fundamental principles of parliamentary law, but there's some really good issues of the National Parliamentarian which are titled these really tantalizing things like, have I discovered a new fundamental principle of parliamentary law? But here's
something else that we need to clean up in Roberts is they need to clearly define those.
But it says, such as the rule that allows only one question to be considered at a time cannot be suspended even by a unanimous vote. But we already talked about an exception to that.
Yep. Welcome to the contradiction.
Yes. Thus, since it is a fundamental principle of parliamentary law that the right to vote is limited to the members of an organization who are actually present at the time the vote is taken in a regular or properly called meeting, the rules cannot be suspended to give the right to vote to a non-member or to authorize absentee voting, but you can authorize that in your bylaws. You can't suspend a rule to do that, but you can put it in your bylaws.
Right.
Also, here's the same thing about cumulative voting, and we talked about this in the bylaws committee, that it has to be authorized in the bylaws in order to allow cumulative voting. It also says rules protecting absentees cannot be suspended even by unanimous consent because the absentees do not consent to such a suspension. That is why notice requirements are sacrosanct, because notice requirements protect absentees. Even if you think the notice requirement, like we were talking outside the show, of 120 days, and maybe it's not for a really large body, 120 days might not be like a really, to me, that seems like a really long notice requirement, but you know, it's up. But it's protecting absentees. It can't be suspended.
Yeah. And we're more preferable to shorter periods anyway.
Right. And you can't suspend basic rights except through disciplinary proceedings.
And even then, there has to be no specific
All right. That's really all I want to talk about with suspending of the rules.
There's
but I wanted
one
to
more.
go.
There's one more.
Go ahead.
Rules of their application outside of a session in which is in progress can't be suspended.
Correct. It can only be for that things that are happening within that meeting. Right.
Right. So we can't suspend a rule that says that at the next meeting we can do X, Y, and Z. No, we can only apply it for this one. And and there's a good. It kind of ties into the whole protecting absentees and all the notice stuff at the same time. Because let's face it, who knows who's going to be at the next meeting?
But this all gets a little tricky. But that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, good stuff.
And Richard Brown wasn't here. I'm sure he would have had some good insight. But all right, this has been an hour of just talking about suspending the rules. We're such exciting people.
Well, look at the bright side. It's a complex topic. It's not really controversial. Although we did find some issues.
Yeah, we did. I think it is a little bit controversial.
Although
all right.
I'll throw one at you. I'll throw one at you for a future show.
Okay.
The relationship between the straw poll and the prohibition and a motion to postpone indefinitely to gauge the reading of the room. That came up on the forum about a month ago.
Oh, really? See, I
was pointing out there that you could use the motion to postpone indefinitely as a way of conducting a straw poll without conducting a straw poll.
Well, you could also use what was that tactic? Last week it said to gauge the strength or weakness of your position. That is, the motion to postpone indefinitely. Was that it? Okay, yeah, yes. We did talk about that then. That's and we said that was a legitimate tactic, and it was saying kind of that article was implying that it was kind of like a misuse.
Yeah, and you can also do it by going into some forms of the quasi committee of the whole too.
Is that Jean?
Yeah, that's Jean.
When did you change your name, Jean?
That's Jean.
I mean, I recognize the picture, but I'm like, that's not the normal name. He doesn't care what we think, though. He doesn't care what we think. He doesn't care. Yeah. Okay, that's going to be it.
I just find these weird things about Roberts, and it drives Hahnemann crazy because it's like, well, what are you talking about?
What date is next Sunday?
Say again?
What dates is next Sunday?
That would be the 29th.
Okay, so we should be fine for that.
I'm out of town.
Oh, you're out of town, so we're not doing one next weekend. All right, but we still need to come up with a topic for next time. I mean, I might
Yeah, 'cause
think of something. Oh, I'm getting all stuffed up again. Through reading National Parliamentarian or something, which is what made me think of this. But otherwise,
Yeah.
All right, that's gonna be it then, because I gotta get ready to go to Christmas party.
Don't
All right.
don't have too much.
Well, hopefully I'll have way too much to drink. But other than that, all right. Have a good rest of the week, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you all. And you guys gotta. I'm sorry.
For everybody else, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, and everything else you might celebrate.
Yes. All right. Bye, y'all.
Hey, see ya.
Oh, what did I do? There we go.
Favor! Let's hear the opposition side. Like a stubborn donkey's bray. All opposed? You say nay. Opposed! Opposed! The motion carries anyway.